President Roosevelt issued his famous call for 50,000 planes in 1940. A local veteran says some thought that was impossible.
Gwen Bevel and photojournalist Nick Kiefer introduce us to one man who trained the pilots to fly those planes into World War II.
Jay McLeod just celebrated his 100th birthday, so he remembers when the president asked Congress to pay for 50,000 planes. McLeod says the country really pulled together, and just a few years later, 90,000 had been built. Jay McLeod was still in high school when he snapped this from the backseat of an airplane.
I said, I'm going to take this picture because nobody will ever believe I did this.
He went on to do a lot of flying.
It was a pretty big deal that most people don't know anything about. That's what this is all about.
And he's taken note of a few things he found interesting in the book about when the airlines went to war.
I was there almost 90 years ago.
McLeod was an instructor pilot.
We were asked to do things that were, as we look back on, were almost impossible.
He worked for TWA then, and the company was tasked, along with other airlines, to put together a flight school.
We had 50,000 airplanes that were all land-based airplanes that had to be into this war.
They made up the Airline War Training Institute.
They were asked to put those young men in the left seat or in the command seat of the most sophisticated airplanes in the Air Force's inventory.
He says he often thinks about those young men they were sending to war.
And flying it across the ocean and then flying it in combat when you got there.
They trained 1,100 pilots.
They did, well, yes, they did.
But he says the training had its cost.
They were people I knew and I flew with.
On one trip from the factory in Kansas City, his beloved friend Blackie was flying a B-24 with 7 men on board.
Those people were all in parachutes when they found them, so they were expecting the worst.
He remembers one close call in a snowstorm.
I stuck the gas tanks in this big 4-engine bomber with a stick that I used to measure fuel. I could not measure any fuel.
He says many of the pilots didn't have the instrument training he did.
In my earlier years, I was interested in the technical side of it.
McLeod went on to earn his gold wings.
The fact that I was able to become a naval aviator was something that was completely beyond my wildest dream.
He flew Catalina's low, looking for Nazi submarines.
We patrolled the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico and the sea frontier.
He doesn't have to flip through the pages of history. He lived it.
It was a life-changing experience for the whole country.
McLeod stayed in far beyond the war and retired on his 60th birthday. Every bit of air along the way, he carried this photo of his wife Trudy in his shirt pocket. McLeod says it was very expensive to learn to fly, so he became a mechanic, then used that employment to build up his flying time. He says that made him an old pilot cadet at about 21, but he already had a pilot's license. He says some of those guys had never even been around an airplane. Here for you, Gwen Bevel, KSN News 3.
On behalf of Devon James Injury Lawyers, we're honored to be with a member of the greatest generation. Jay McLeod served our country in World War II. Mr. McLeod, thank you for your service.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Veteran Salute is sponsored by the Devon James Injury Lawyers.